There's also information that Hasan had a direct link and somewhat of a, I don't know that I'd call it a close relationship, but a regular relationship with someone who's described as a radical Muslim imam, some kind of Muslim cleric. I'm not sure of the details, and hopefully we'll get more details about that. And certainly all of these things put together would beg the question, who knew about this? Which organizations and which federal authorities were communicating about this guy? And why wasn't this in any way brought to the forefront, and why wasn't anything done about it? Now, some are being very quick to call this terrorism, quite literally. And Joe Lieberman is one who says, yeah, it may be terrorism. Let's take a listen to what Joe had to say.
It's too early. It's premature to reach conclusions about what motivated Hasan. But it's clear that he was, one, under personal stress, and two, if the reports that we're receiving of various statements he made, acts he took, are valid, he had turned to Islamist extremism. And therefore, if that is true, the murder of these 13 people was a terrorist act. And in fact, it was the most destructive terrorist act to be committed on American soil since 9/11.
Well, we have to remember a couple of things when listening to Joe Lieberman make any kind of comment. Number one is that we've seen Joe Lieberman's steady decline from the precipice of logic and reason off of that cliff into what some would consider complete and utter nonsense politically. He's gone from, hey, I support the Democrats on everything but the war, to I'm barely with the Democrats on anything, essentially, is where we've seen Joe Lieberman go.
Right, but I'm going to agree with him here. You know, I think this Hasan guy was probably someone who started out with good intentions, and over the course of the war and everything that's happened, probably took up a radical Islamist point of view. And I would say it's at least an act of domestic terrorism.
Well, okay, I'm not disagreeing with Joe Lieberman, but the one thing I don't know is it the wars that turned him into a Muslim extremist? Again, I don't know. What about the wars? Is it the fact that he disagrees with the U.S. action, or was it his day-to-day encounters with U.S. soldiers and hearing about their traumatic experiences? It's hard for me to buy that would turn someone from an absolute starting at zero into someone who would do this. I think that there had to, if those were components, and they very well may have been, there had to have been something else that pushed him over the edge. And I don't know, or at least that was an underlying problem. I don't think this would just turn anybody into a mass murderer. Otherwise, we would see it regularly.
Well, I mean, it's not like it happened overnight. I mean, how long has this war been going on? You know, well, starting with, let's say, Afghanistan.
Sure.
You know, maybe, 10 years?
It's been years. It's been a long time.
And who knows, after what he started seeing and hearing, things he might have started reading online, people he talked to, I think over that amount of time, you could do a complete 180.
But again, to a so-called normal person, and I hate to use that term, I don't think that a long war, meaning why hasn't it happened to many, many more members of the military who, they may be Muslim, they may be military psychiatrists, they may have a lot of the same components in common with Hasan. Why didn't it happen to them? Which is where I'm getting that just those things won't turn just anybody into a domestic terrorist. And you're right. I think Joe Lieberman may have a point. It may be too early to tell, but we need to explore these connections. And I'm not, by any means, I know we'll get emails saying that I'm jumping in with the conservative media. I'm just saying if these connections are proven to exist, there is, whether we call this domestic terrorism or not, would probably need to be discussed. And what will it change? Nothing. Those 13 people are dead, and this is a guy who presumably is going to spend the rest of his life in jail or in a mental institution, or even be put to death. I mean, this was Texas, and I know that there's federal law involved. We'll see. We'll have to see about that. General George Casey says that whether or not we use the terrorism label, what he doesn't want is for the casualty, the additional casualty of the Fort Hood shootings to be diversity, which he says could easily happen. Here he is talking to George Stephanopoulos.
Be very careful about it, and I think the speculation could potentially heightened backlash against some of our Muslim soldiers. And what happened at Fort Hood was a tragedy. But I believe it would be an even greater tragedy if our diversity becomes a casualty here. And it's not just about Muslims. We have a very diverse army. We have a very diverse society. And that gives us all strength.
Casey's making a good point here. While this individual, whether or not Hasan is proven to have committed an act of terrorism, whether it is proven that he has been in contact with Al-Qaeda and Muslim extremists, so on and so forth, it would be even worse for American Muslims and Muslims in the military if this carries over to them for something that they were just simply weren't involved in.
Of course it's going to carry over to them.
You don't think there's any way around it?
No, not at all. This guy did the worst favor for American Muslims that anybody could have done.
And there's no policy and there's no media. There's nothing that can happen in terms of a press campaign that is going to change that, in your opinion. I mean, are all Muslims in the military now suspects? Are they going to be looked at differently, whether they're serving literally right now in Iraq or wherever they are?
Or perhaps not in the eyes of their comrades and other soldiers, but, there's millions of Americans who see this guy's name and, see a few things on the news and think just horrible things about Muslims and just think that all Muslims are extremists and so on and so forth.
Muslims in the U.S. Army are now a danger.
This is just more fuel for the haters.
Well, Barack Obama at the Fort Hood Memorial made a couple of points, and one of them was about losing soldiers on American soil. And it is amazing that when we have two wars going on and we're losing soldiers every single week on foreign soil, to be losing soldiers on American soil for a reason like this is certainly disheartening. Here's President Barack Obama.
This is a time of war. Yet these Americans did not die on a foreign field of battle. They were killed here, on American soil, in the heart of this great state, in the heart of this great American community. This is the fact that makes the tragedy even more painful, even more incomprehensible. For those families who have lost a loved one, no words can fill the void that's been left.
And he went on to also talk about what will happen to Hasan, Major Hasan, the killer, the shooter in this horrible case.
It may be hard to comprehend the twisted logic that led to this tragedy, but this much we do know. No faith justifies these murderous and craven acts. No just and loving God looks upon them with favor. For what he has done, we know that the killer will be met with justice in this world and the next.
Well, we could have done without the religious stuff, I think, at a... See, we're talking about such a sensitive religious situation. I mean, this is a guy who is a Muslim, and we know that religion and the connection between church and state is already a controversial issue. If I'm Barack Obama, and this may have been on purpose for this exact reason, I stay away from talking about God at this service. Wouldn't you?
Well, I would have left out the last sentence. I think where he says no God would look favorably upon these acts, I think that's a good thing. I think he's kind of saying, the radical Islamist view is ridiculous, which I agree with. But after he says he'll be met with justice in this life or the next, yeah, leave that part out.
I mean, which is essentially saying he'll go to hell, right? I mean, is that the lay interpretation?
Guess, yeah. That's what it sounds like to me. Right.